All right, everybody, we are going to get started into this brown bag. Thank you for all those attending and everybody who stayed on the Zoom online. I am going to pass the baton over to Lester, who has prepared a presentation for us.
Great, thank you very much. And if you'll go ahead and open up the, let's see, well, the kind of the topic that I had suggested as a brown bag is the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety has a program referred to as Wildfire Prepared. Many of you are probably familiar with Wildfire Prepared Homes, but now they've expanded it also to include a Wildfire Prepared Neighborhood. And so thought that some discussion about what's in that wildfire prepared neighborhood, the ideas, the what some of the standards are, but there was also there's two designated that have met that standard within California. One is in Cameron Park, recently received designation, and had some concerns about what I saw also. So probably to start, Lester Lebedkin, I am not representing any fire safe council, and I'm not, not representing any organization specific. The other person that's with me is Kit Veerkamp, who also had kind of interest in the topic and a little bit of some insight. The other is hopefully going to go through a little bit about what a wildfire prepared neighborhood is and all, and then more, I was hoping for some discussion about what people see and kind of how we could encourage people to start looking at their neighborhood and in a way that meets kind of where we are, staying consistent with the sense of place. So that's okay, wait. Let's see. Folks may be familiar with also the other is the California Insurance Commissioner's Office and Safer from Wildfire is another set of sort of standards for homes. But for coming up with neighborhoods there, it's a little different anyway. What are we looking for neighborhood? The other that folks probably are familiar with is there's sort of defensible space, home hardening, and then the idea of community safety. And so the wildfire prepared neighborhood starts to work on that issue around neighborhood safety. On the slide, you'll see some of the standards that are specific for the wildfire prepared neighborhood. And again, this is a process put together by the Insurance Institute for Business and Home Safety, or the IBHS is the other that you'll offer here. So starting with structure separation of a minimum of 10 feet up to 100 foot of spacing. Many of the studies that have been done show that really you need a 30 foot plus where just the heat from one home doesn't ignite the adjacent home. Certainly Southern California, that was the experience of that the kind of home to home ignition is a real problem. And so a little surprised by the 10 foot, but that is what the kind of the standard is. Then the other is that there's a process of looking at the vegetation and fuel assessment across the neighborhood that's been identified, and then some modeling from fuel models and fire propagation that's done. And so when there's a standard, a document that outlines all the standards, and it's pretty technical and also requires a lot of various detailed calculations. But one of the things that struck me when I was looking at it was from when we do home assessments, it's another element that folks could be thinking about as you come up to the neighborhood. is, how does the neighborhood look as well? And these are some of the factors that you might be thinking about is, is it a closed-in neighborhood, or are like many parts of our county where it's really more of an intermix, where there's homes farther spaced apart. And then looking at what's the vegetation. And then two other calculations that are done have to do with the flame threat and ember threat. And if you don't mind, the next slide. So flame threat, let's look at, and this drawing it comes from the standards from this wildfire prepared neighborhood document, that you have in gray would essentially be the neighborhood, and then looking at the vegetation pattern within a quarter mile of the boundary of the neighborhood. And if on the drawing, what you can see is there's a whole bunch of slices, and you look at each of those slices. Again, this is the formal analysis that's done. Look at each of those slices, what's the vegetation pattern within it, the types of vegetation, and then doing modeling on the potential of actually having flames approaching and the size of flames, wind pattern and whatnot, that would be approaching the neighborhood. Next one. And then for ember threat, it expands out to 4¼ miles buffer around the neighborhood. Again, similar calculation of what the vegetation pattern. So it's not something that we as assessors would be doing, and it's very much something that like developers might be looking at incorporating to make their upcoming development a little bit more successful or appealing to purchasers. And obviously the hope is that for folks it'll be easier to get insurance. And then the last part of it is looking at the vegetation pattern continuity within the neighborhood itself, and that's another element that's assessed. So here in our area in Cameron Park, there was a newly developed development of homes. I think there's about 26 home lots, anyways, within it. Just recently designated. It's off of Cambridge, south of Highway 50, and the image at the bottom is kind of what are at least some drawings of expected. The look of the homes. I believe the homes would all meet the wildfire prepared home standards, and then on top of it would be the wildfire prepared neighborhood. Let's see, go ahead. So, and this is maybe starts to get at a little of the concerns that I have about it. And so why kind of be interested in discussion. So in this area circled in green, it shows in 1995 what this area looked like. It was a oak woodland stand just south of Highway 50 prior to development and all. Next. And by 2011, there was a neighborhood just to the north of this area that had been developed, and approved, through the county building department. Next one. And one of the things to make sure that, and I want to be real upfront and frank, because the wildfire prepared neighborhood standards weren't developed at the time. This project actually dates back to early 2000s. But it was not, it was just going to be a standard home development property within the county. The oak removal had been approved back in 2007, with including some mitigation of select purchasing, acquiring some other oak woodland near Highway 50. And then actually as you'll see in the pictures, the oak woodland was removed, mostly removed anyways, back in 2019 before the current developer it was actually working on the project and before these wildfire prepared neighborhood standards were even in existence. So it's more the thought that I had was, as we move to the future, what is the advice and or concerns that we may have, sharing with folks, and could be that individual neighborhoods, the existing neighborhoods would be looking to try and get this type of designation, somewhat similar to going for Firewise designation. And what might be some guidance and assistance we could be providing to folks. So here's a picture now. Again, the green circle shows the area that is that was designated as a wildfire prepared community based on the standards that are that were developed through the Institute of Business and Home Safety. And here's again some illustrations of what they expect the homes to look like. And my concern, I guess, and again, I'm speaking for myself, not as a the Fire Safe Council representative, but that, you know, the vegetation is, you know, desert plants. It's really not taking advantage of sense of place and how to encourage that we're still meeting the objectives of having a firewise and fire resilient home and defensible space, but not so stark and you know, using plants that don't fit into the area. Folks that might not be familiar with Doug Tallamy is a professor from, I think, Delaware that has some really interesting work on the value of native plants that are consistent with the location. So with that, I'd kind of be curious to hear, yeah, folks, you know, what you've been seeing, what your thoughts are, ways to be supportive of not just, you know, the home assessment, but neighborhood improvements to have more fire resilient neighborhoods while still being, you know, consistent with and compatible with where we live and the values that our county has to offer. Maybe you want.
So I tend to get involved in a lot of different things, and so one of the things in the planning concepts, even new design standards is a whole new thing being instigated on the divide, or developing our own design standards, which I think has already been done on a large part of the county already, for the entire community, for these little for kind of the central areas of the, like Kelsey, Georgetown, Cool, a number of the communities where there's any commercial or multi-family parcels, and everybody, no matter whether it's that community or others, everybody always seems to be saying, we live in El Dorado County and want to maintain the rural character of this county and the beauty, oaks and everything else that comes with it. And I see stuff like this, and see Lester's presented this before, and it's terribly frustrating to see how that absolutely just demolished any sense of rural character. And so how do we do this safely? And I think that most of you have seen the presentations I've done with regard to defensible space, especially during training for the assessor training, and seeing that zone 1, zone 2, there's less density in certain types of plant material to focus on. Herbaceous perennials keep the woody plant material really low and more dispersed the closer you get to the structure. And so this kind of proposal is just something to me that is going to absolutely ruin the character. What I'm confused about, maybe you can answer this, is that it's one thing to have the standard for a neighborhood, but in our area, even Cool and all the different neighborhoods I see around the county, is that you've got one backing up to another. So you don't have it until until you get outside of the community, and we were just talking about this change in terminology that originally they started out with discussing fire prepared or wildfire prepared neighborhood as opposed to neighborhoods. Then they took that down a step. But that might work in certain parts of Europe, because really truly they have these little enclaves all over the place, and depending on which country you go to. But here you've got one neighborhood backed up to another until you start getting into more rural landscapes, more far less density. So I don't know how they would even interpret that, because you can't even get to where you've got that 4.5 miles of not where embers aren't going to affect, let alone I'd love to see what their recommendations are for the vegetation within that zone. Maybe something more like what we're already kind of seeing with regard to reduced fuels, so to speak. And I don't know, so the challenges are real.
I've got a question. Jessica, can you go back to that slide that showed the 4.5 miles? What I don't, oh, what I don't understand there is how could that Cameron Park community qualify? They don't have 4.5 miles.
Well, it's not necessarily that there would be a 4.5 mile buffer of, no vegetation, that, it's just, you do a calculation and there's for different, vegetation types, there's factors that are used to identify, what the ember, how big the ember threat is. And also they build in some, wildfire wind characteristics and whatnot that could be generated.
Not
And so it's
presentation by IBHS.
Mhm.
It's a discussion on the. Okay,
anyway, it's
I'm muted, right?
No, you're not.
oh, no, you're not.
I can't see it when it's in share. There we go.
Well, I guess my point is, are they suggesting you need to clear cut an area of 4.5 miles around?
No, and let's see, in one of the slides, I had the link to the standard document. And anyways, they're not calling for, removal of everything, but just of doing a calculation and a kind of standards of what they're.
Is it this slide?
At the bottom of that link shows the standards that are required. I was just going to see if I can. Actually, they are using I didn't copy this, but they're using some scientific work that was done on wind speeds, particle size, transport distance, and to come up with anyway some standards of what would be the at least meeting a certain vegetation type within the area. So both surrounding and then also within the community itself.
Would you like me to?
Okay, so.
Do you want me to pull it up,
Yeah,
the link?
well, go back to that 4.5 one. Okay. So does that take prevailing winds into account?
I believe so, yes, from what I saw. And although, you can see from the drawing that they're showing 4.5 miles, 4.25 miles around the community, not larger within any one of those sectors. Although, and I'm not sure if that's part of why the 4.25 miles is that when you build in the wind direction, that it might differ for different sectors. Again, you can see those lines going across that you do a calculation for each of those sectors. What is there? It looks like 10 or so.
I think the point I'm trying to make, I'm not disagreeing here is that in Northern California, if you look at the historical fire storms, it could be the Tubbs Fire, Camp Fire. Those firestorms, ever storms, generally always occur in the months of September, October, November. Camp Fire occurred, I think, November 5th. And the winds are coming from the northeast, some call them diablo winds. And those have been historically, I'm no expert, but to the best of my knowledge, the most destructive wildfires in the last 10 years or so. And I would think that they might want to take, for an ember storm, they might want to take that into account.
Yeah, I don't disagree, although actually, interestingly, when you look at the fires that occurred in El Dorado County, for whatever reason, ours, the King Fire, the Eldor Fire, the Sand Fire. So, yeah, we don't get those Diablo winds as much. Anyway, so, yeah, a little bit of, kind of curious to hear other people also. And yeah, what exactly would it require to meet that? If you don't mind going to the one slide that shows, let's see, yeah, keep going a little. There, that one. So yeah, how those calculations would be done, as Kit was describing. So you have this existing community to the north of this new community that's getting designated as a wildfire prepared neighborhood. And do they need to address the vegetation continuity within that existing community to then get the designation?
We have a hand online by Sherry Hawk. Sherry, you're free to ask your question.
I don't know if it's so much. Well, one question is this just for new developments or existing? Would be my first question. And my second question would be, no, my second comment would be, this would never work up in Pollock Pines. I mean, is this intended for all areas or just more of the rural down the hill areas? I'm just trying to understand how this could apply in our area. Thinning of trees would require clear cutting, basically, because we have so many trees.
And so I'm not an expert on this, and it was what triggered me was more, seeing what was showing up in Cameron Park.
Okay.
And I believe, though, from just the reading, it would be most likely within new communities, new developments, simply because there's a lot of calculations, a lot of effort, and the financial benefit would be really probably to the developers to be able to sell and market the properties. But conceivably, a small community, maybe an HOA, would be interested in pursuing this to try and improve the insurance opportunities for their neighborhood. In looking at it, I didn't see that it specifically said it's only for new developments, that it could be for existing ones. And then the other part of it would be, again, as we're giving input to and advice to individual homeowners, is because that whole idea of neighborhood is one of the factors, and fire resilience is what are some things to be looking at and thinking about when it comes to a neighborhood being wildfire resilient.
Right. Yeah, I'm just trying to be open-minded, and to me, developers up in this type of area, people move up here because of the trees. If they're going to make areas like this, I don't see that as a good sell for them. But I mean, for insurance reasons, absolutely. I really appreciate you bringing this up. I can see it for down below a little bit more. And again, just appreciate you doing this presentation today. Thank you.
So here's a thought. in terms of, I'm trying to think, what would they possibly be trying to get out of in terms of community or neighborhood versus our individual 100-foot defensible space zones. And when you think about it, I look at my own neighborhood. I live in Cool. We're Oak Woodland primarily. And one of the things though is 100-foot defensible space, and there's the rest of my 5 acres. And some of it is pretty densely wooded. And even though I did have some work done to reduce the density of all this brush under oak trees and just oak trees just out of control down on the lower part of our property. This is ubiquitous across all the different acreages in our whole community. And I think that maybe with this wildfire safe, is it wildfire safe communities? Prepared, thank you, wildfire prepared communities, what they're trying to get at is that we also need to be safe as a community or neighborhood. We need to be addressing those in-between spaces other than our just 100-foot defensible space. And so maybe that's, their goal is to reduce some of that fuel, not all of your trees. I'm certain that that's not what they're after. Although reducing the density of some of them may need to be removed. And actually I found as I went into my own oak woodland, because it had been overgrown for so long and got so dense, as we started removing and really getting in there, yeah, we were removing a lot of old dead trees or trees that were not healthy and could never be restored to, the health of a nice, good, healthy oak tree. So anyway, reducing that is going to improve the health of those still standing. So anyway, but the other thing, the challenge in that is that we look at the bigger picture, and I think Lester alluded to the work of Doug Tallamy, and it's all about the habitat value. If we want, we're not only looking at the trees as part of the place we live, but all the wildlife and the richness of the environment, biodiversity that's entangled with all of that. And so that also involves having stuff on the ground too, not just a park-like setting, which is what CAL FIRE now encourages, this whole thing of pretty much taking out everything except the trees, except where there aren't trees, you can leave some shrubbery. So now and that's because of the ladder fuels concept, and I get that. So you need to really kind of balance all that out. But to go in and in all these in-between places, what it would do to wildlife diversity in our communities, how, I get it, our insurance is important, we need to be affordable, and all these factors to balance. But I think that's what they're getting at, is the in-between places between our 100-foot defensible space within our neighborhoods.
I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to ask that question. So I've got 10 acres. CAL FIRE has been live several times, and because of the steep slope, they require that my defensible space go down 300 feet. Beyond that, and I've actually got a little bit beyond the 300, but beyond that, I know nothing about native plants. But I mean, it is so thick down there. These things with red berries on them, I'm sure you know what they are. Poison oak, all kinds of stuff, but also, around us all the time, we see bobcats, mountain lions, hawks, had a possum on the deck the other day. They probably live down in that stuff. So, I could tell a dozer to go down there and clear all the way down 1,100 feet, because the top of my property is 1,700 feet, and the bottom is 700 feet. That's 1,000-foot drop. But I don't want to do that.
Well, and again, the standard for what could become designated as a wildfire prepared neighborhood, the distance between homes can't be more than 100 feet. So it really, this doesn't apply in sort of what we think of as the WUI intermix, where homes are on, 5 to 10 acre parcels or something. It's meant for more of a neighborhood specific.
urban neighborhood, yeah.
Suburban.
Well, suburban, yeah. But we have a lot of that in the county, and, the potential for more of it to be developed in the future.
I have a comment, and my comment is gonna sound like it's so far-fetched, but it does, it's a bullseye for this, and that is, you started out your meeting this morning with the requirement, the government requirement, the federal requirement to have retrofit for all hospitals, regardless of where it is in the state. I know for a fact there are multiple hospitals in the Bay Area that are built on fault lines, right over the fault lines. Okay, that makes sense to retrofit. Why you are retrofitting up here for a fault line, I don't quite know. But when I look at this and I go, we have our defensible space, we're learning about all the defensible space. That does not look like defensible space as it is in 2025, much more to add more to not even have an island of safety. You're just spreading out further and further and further. So I guess my comment is, if the government can do a blanket mandate that everything needs to be retrofitted, how is it we can continue bizarre building the way they build hospitals? And now they're building communities in areas that have not the earthquake, but fire, and to do the same sloppy thinking process.
And probably number one, to make sure not to throw the developer under the bus, that what you see though was approved back in 2007, before we even had our oak ordinance in the county.
But then you get common sense that says, you know what, that's actually an oxymoron. You can't do it that way. Therefore, you change the thinking process. And that, hoping that's the direction you guys are going as far as the objection is, the new findings about fire safety can now be applied to the rest of this 2026 plus.
Yeah, thank you. And exactly. And I think that I guess what we're somewhat pushing is that you don't need to go to extremes to meet the wildfire resilience.
Because there have been a lot of changes with respect to requirements for building standards in response to this. And then the landscape standard, the defensible space has gotten more stringent. Whether zone 0 is gonna help with that, hopefully. But so there have been some changes, but yet they're still packing the homes in, which still is creating its own danger in terms of that proximity.
So we used to, unfortunately, not so jokingly say, if you want to find out where the Hayward caliber asphalt is in East Bay, you just line up all the hospitals and the nuclear reactor on the UC Berkeley campus, and you are right on top of the Hayward fault.
When they condemn a high school because it's on the fault line, and then they build the city hall, and then another
Oh, that would
hospital
have been
come
so
out.
much of a loss. But first of all, El Dorado County, when I was the county planning commissioner in Nevada County back in the 80s, El Dorado County was always cited as the poster child of bad land use planning. It's known throughout the state. But one of the things that seems though the standards basically presupposes relatively flat ground and almost a tabula rasa. where nothing exists. And here in El Dorado County, the topography is so varied. And just looking up, we go from the USDA hardiness zones from 6A to 9B. Most of us are probably in 9B. So we have such a varied amount of terrain and natural, natural vegetation that it just doesn't seem to be taken into account here. And I look at, the existing density of the vegetation. We all have this, and, I know when I bought my house, everything was up to the house. And now it's pushed back further and further. And I think it was brought up earlier that we don't do all the work in the county. Other folks in the county see, well, I got to get my own act together, and we've been pushing it out. But also to recognize that whereas many people think that we live in a rural area, we're really living in exurbia. That goes from frontier to rural, to exurbia to suburbia. And the thing is, for many parts of this county, we are transitioning from exurbia to suburbia. I live in Diamond Springs, which has been designated as basically for, a lot of growth, even though many of us, grew up, lived there thinking that it was rural, but it really wasn't. And you look at these subdivisions with basically just, doze the road in and then doze a bunch of building paths. There was no rhyme or reason. Many of us live in one way act communities. And I just looked at that, the photo of their stuck on hardy board homes and the landscaping. It just looked like Southern California. Okay, and so the model there, goes so I know, Lester is active in the Native Plant Society, is using the appropriate native plants to maintain the aesthetics of the community but reduce the hazard. That's my comment.
Yeah, thank you. So I had a question about the vegetation that, I'm seeing pictures of. Are they proposing to tell you what kind of vegetation that you can plant? Or did the builder just make poor vegetation choices aesthetically?
Let's see, well, I think they come vegetated, landscaped, so that would be part of it. And actually, if I remember, part of the requirement is that there's a fund, so similar, I guess, to HOA, that maintains the vegetation, has to be made as part of getting that designation, has to be maintained for 10 years, I think it is. So yeah, it is the decisions of the landscaper that was working with the developer. And what the palette is that they're working from. Actually, it's one of the other things that folks can take the opportunity. As an example, down in El Dorado Hills recently, there was a call for redoing the some of the plans for landscaping, and sort of that opportunity to submit comments that try and adjust the palette of plants that's acceptable to at least some portion would be native plants or appropriate. And one of the concerns is when you say, well, you have to have California native plants, that means, yeah, the yucca and desert plants meet that requirement, but they're not appropriate in El Dorado Hills and in El Dorado County.
So would the El Dorado County put that in, say, the vegetation management ordinance or another planning ordinance?
It would be in a planning ordinance, probably not. I don't think the vegetation management would be the logical place, but for planning. And there are some requirements relating to water use and other standards. Actually, probably Kid can answer this one better than I.
There's already legislation in place through what's called MWELO. It's the Model Landscape Efficient Water Ordinance. Anyway, it's a designed to cut down on water usage in landscaping everywhere in terms of home use or actually commercial. So there are plant palettes that the landscape typically most plans for commercial development or even something as large as a subdivision, it has to go through planning approvals. So they're done by landscape architects using these regulations. And they're not all native plants, but there is a big movement. They're either Mediterranean-based type plants in California or native plants. So which is a good thing, but in this case, and then you've got your HOAs. And the developers are having to comply. They have to meet the MWLO requirements. However, then you get HOAs and they start modifying their plant lists unbeknownst to the fact that these, they're starting to violate those regulations and just adding their favorite plants rather than complying with these things. So that gets to be a challenge. That part, once you get outside of the approvals, past the approval stage and inspection stage, I don't know how they can keep control of that. So thank you.
Just a clarification here. This is actually IBHS driving this and not government, correct?
Correct. Right. Although, IBHS would be setting the standards for getting that designation, but other requirements related to the approval of the development and all itself, some of the landscaping requirements and whatnot would be part of the county planning department. And one of the things, for instance, out in the Roseville area and in other places across the state, there's some efforts at, rather than going an ordinance approach, was a resolution sort of encouraging the use of native plants, kind of stuff that's more appropriate to the area. And it's something that's kind of gaining some traction anyways in various areas.
I think it's kind of natural that we all want to plant something that probably doesn't belong there. I've tried to grow an avocado for years. So
Strawberry?
that's not working. But I do think there's a couple of things that the county could do to help with some of this situation. Is the first thing is, why are we approving a plan 20 years ago that is not going to be built for 30 years in advance? And what builders have a tendency to do is say, we want all the good stuff of today's regulations. We want that 4-foot zone and we want all of this, but they don't want to update some of the other things. And county planning could tell each homeowner that they have to have a tree. And they could limit the trees to whatever, but somebody's going to plant an avocado that won't grow. That's what we do. But I do believe the county planning department has some say in what goes on. And I can only use Strawberry as an example, but they wanted to build something and they had all the shrubs all around the property and all around the house. And of course I had to make a comment that said, you shouldn't be doing this. And anyway, I do believe it stems from county planning and just how they look at things and allow almost anything to go on.
And again, and maybe to the county's defense, it was approved. The expectation was it was going to be built quickly. Actually, in the picture there, that area to my left, anyways, was also part of the development. One part was small lots, and the other part was larger lots. But that other part hasn't been built, and the county kept requiring adjustments to their plans and whatnot until they finally started to actually break ground. And the other, because the county, again, since this is driven by IBHS and their requirements and standards to get that designation, the county wouldn't really be in they'd somehow have to coordinate efforts that the county isn't requiring things that would then push it out of being eligible for the wildfire prepared neighborhood designation. But it seems to me, we should be looking at trying to encourage more reasonable and locally appropriate landscaping and all. Which is why I had suggested that I thought this might make for a good discussion for a brown bag.
One of the things is, there are very few places locally that have good varieties of native plants that I found. I was in, I was down in Richmond and I was at the former Annie's Annuals, a place called Curious Flora. I went crazy. I said, my wife's gonna kill me because I had so many plants with me. And I mean, but they had great assortment, and different cultivars of native plants. And I was very impressed. But if I go to, you know, Green Acres or Home Depot or whatever, they've got all these, sterile engineered type plants, that are not gonna self-sow, and it's very difficult. That's why I went crazy in this nursery. And, if we're trying to encourage folks, I went out to the Sherwood Gardens, a couple weeks ago, but they only have a sale like once a year or something like that.
So I'm now the co-president and the horticulture chair for our Native Plant Society. And I've been running the plants.
I can tell you a Dorothy Parker line, but I won't do it here.
So we have 2 plant sales a year, but this is one of the big challenges. So actually, we're getting like 12. We will try to meet whatever sale amount that people come and order from online. And we will do this, and this is my delivery guide for most of at least one of our big sales each year. But the challenges are big, and it's statewide. It's an issue all over. We are trying, the California Native Plant Society is trying to do things to promote more, and you know what, the demand is increasing all over the state. I see people making huge changes in neighborhoods. Sacramento, it's big time in Roseville. So the changes are happening. The market will respond. It's just slow. So, but hang in there. Take advantage of our.
I'm going back to Curious Flora on Sunday.
Go to my hillside, take it off.
Wait, it's 1100.
Oh, yeah, no. Yeah.
We'll tie a rope around you.
The thing is, whether you're using natives or not, it's the type of plant materials, it's the using non-woody, herbaceous type perennials in that zone 1 area that are going to be the safer plants that are less likely to ignite, or if they do, they fizzle quickly. That's the whole thing, is they're not taking the flame and transferring it to something else. Getting people to understand, and I've gone and done assessments at places where there's big patches of manzanita, and that's not really, I would love to see, I've done enough classwork and courses and certificates and all of this stuff over the years. There are some foresters out there that are great at talking. They have historic pictures of some of the old, forests back 100 years ago, or as white settlement came in. They were taking photographs, as soon as the cameras were developed. And so they've got photographs showing that our forests were not as dense as they are today. And then they were, of course, mowed down. Look at old pictures of Placerville. You could hardly see a tree standing any longer in the gold rush days. And then obviously it came back with a flourish, because after that people started settling in, and they didn't harvest those trees any longer. And so, now here we are with these overcrowded landscapes in terms of far too dense vegetation, which in a day and age when fires burn through, thin that out. And we just don't have that. And obviously for good reason, because we don't want to lose our homes in that either. That's what we're faced with today. So the challenge is real, and we have to be far more proactive. I think, the attitude or the thoughts, most people just they don't think about their landscapes much. They get it in, they put it there, they maintain it, and then they expect it all to live forever and not have to ever deal with it again. And reality is that your shrubs probably need to be replaced every 10 to 15 years once they get too big and too woody for your lot and the proximity to your home. So, and that's something that most people don't want to hear.
I'm dividing irises if anyone needs.
No, yeah, they're good, yeah, I know. So,
Well, great. I appreciate kind of the discussion and the kind of perspectives that folks are sharing. And again, looking forward, I'm assuming we'll continue to see either new developments or conceivably individual communities and neighborhoods looking to try and move in this direction and being able to give input and advice to folks. And the other, again, is as folks are doing home assessments, to be kind of open and alert as you're driving up to the home that you're looking at, and what are the neighborhood conditions as well.
Thank you, Lester.
Thank you.
I'm really glad you did this.
Go ahead.
Oh, it was,
No,
But this was educational and really glad to hear it.
I have just one last question. Do you have a list at the Native Plant Society that is recommended landscaping plants slash?
so we've had that discussion and actually I've been having. I know Alice, I admire her dearly, but is very opposed to this concept. But more and more, most agencies out there now do have some kind of plant list, so I'm going to be looking to see if we can't coordinate something. Because we are the ones, there's characteristics that we tell people to look for in plants. The problem is trying to remember all that stuff and better that out for yourselves. I think we could do a huge public service in putting one of those plant lists together, recommended plants that are more or less more resistance and more resilient, and then go from there. So we'll see.
And there are two resources that may be of use. One, there was a list of plants that are appropriate for our county, particularly West Slope. And it should be on the El Dorado chapter CNPS website. I can try and find it and send a link to it. And it was broken out by trees, shrubs, herbs. And then the other is there's on the statewide CNPS, California Native Plant Society website, there's some kind of landscaping suggestions that show some fire resilient landscapes and it gives some ideas of what some of the plants that would be appropriate in different settings. And it's broken down by different vegetation communities so that you could look at what's something that would be appropriate in chaparral versus forest landscapes.
Yeah, and I can put together some links for you to get to that particular site that Lester just mentioned, because it's on calscape.org, but it's kind of buried. So I have those actually in the presentation that I'm going to be doing this Friday at the Sierra Renaissance Society, all about native plants and landscapes. It's on Friday.
This Friday?
This Friday. And so just look up Sierra Renaissance. But anyway, so I'll provide those. I'll share those links with you guys.
and if you send it to me, I'll send it to the email list for this class. And Lester, if you have something you want, I can send it to the list of the people at class.
Just want to ask, like you're putting those lists together. Oh, sorry. Yes. When you put the list together, do you include elevation in that? And I only mention that because while the majority of the place will probably handle most everything you have, as you know, certain areas don't. Ask Angel about.
Yes, definitely. There's the West Slope. We're talking about two major
Elevations.
zoning. If you refer to sunset zones, you got 8 and 9. So, and then we're not dealing with the basin, so I'm not worried about that. But yes, definitely we'll be looking at that difference as well.
6,000.
Excellent. And also for the folks at home, avocado's not the only thing. She tried dogwoods up in Strawberry.
Oh.
And out of 19 dogwoods,
I have one left.
because there was two, but the vole or mole or gopher or whatever it was got one.
Ate one.
So anyway, that has nothing to do with this subject.
Although there's a dogwood, there's a high elevation, it's a shrub dogwood that actually, if you go up to Carson Pass, you can see it
Okay.
at 8,500 foot elevation. So if you want it, but it's not, yeah, it's not the same.
Red ocean.
Or yeah.
It's not springtime unless there's snow on the dogwoods.
That's right.
Yeah.
I could swear we had dogwoods in Massachusetts.
There's an eastern dogwood and a western dogwood. Hey,
Wouldn't grow.
Yeah, no, oh, the eastern line, it's not.
Right above 4,500 feet.
You just stop.
That's it.
Anyway,
So tell us more stuff.
there'll be a whole brown bag about that. Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Question, and this goes back to something that, what you alluded to about like the native burns. Cause I remember going to Yosemite as a kid and hearing how the natives would burn Yosemite to keep the vegetation down. Is there any policy or discussions about having prescribed burns, kind of like what you've got, from like November through maybe March? They could help do that, because I know when I visit family in either Colorado or Kansas, that's what we do in the springtime. To burn and get the vegetation down and kind of wake the soil up.
There is an El Dorado Amador Prescribed Burn Association that's pretty active, and they've been doing prescribed burning. The PBA or Prescribed Burn Association is kind of, the thinking is it's like the barn raising. It's volunteers, neighbors that get together and help each other out to do prescribed burns in places. A lot of it is burn piles, but also ground. There's they have a website, a lot of great information. They put on training, yeah, a real valuable resource that we have here. There's an effort. In fact, there was some recent state legislation that helps to facilitate those prescribed burn associations being able to be more effective. Yes, there's a big interest in it, and a lot of folks. You're not going to probably see it in Cameron Park, but although actually I'll take that back, because there was some burning on BLM lands adjacent to Pine Hill, for instance, pile burning that was part of trying to encourage some of the rare plants there while still making it a little bit more fire resilient.
Angel, do we have them on our brown bag list?
We talked about that at our last, having Morgan here at our last report. And I did ask Morgan, El Dorado Amador, the Prescribed Burn Association about my property. She said it's too steep for a prescribed.
Understood. The indigenous or natives has some insights and wisdoms that I think maybe we could incorporate and try to help educate around.
Well, they're very involved in this organization that we're talking about. And Morgan will come and speak to the various fire safe councils. She did for ours. She lives there, so she is really a fascinating presenter.
That's an idea that really needs to be rediscovered.
Yep, it is. Once you're signed up for their newsletter, you will realize how far spread it is and getting more popular all the time.
Good to know.
So I'm gonna piggyback on what you were talking about, and that is, I remember being told that you burn twice, one for vegetation of invasive species and one for native. I can never remember which one am I burning for first. So is there a pattern in that? Because it seemed weird that one was so that the first one, you burn it so it doesn't set seed and replant. And the next one comes up later and maybe you don't burn it. I don't remember, but Your expertise.
So I do know that things like star thistle, people will try burn for start, you can't do it just once. Some of those invasives require numerous times, but the key to being able to successfully burn is like my property was too dense. I could not have done it. You have to do quite a bit of clearing first to make sure it's fire safe. So it seems contrary to the thoughts of doing a prescribed burn, but that the whole thing is to get rid of the understory. So you still have to get rid of a lot of the brush, have some mastication done, or get out there with your saws and do a lot of dragging. But, and then you can successfully do the burns. And once you do it, then if you do it periodically, you'll achieve that level you're talking about.
As far as the Prescribed Burn Society or Association, we belong to that, and we went on a couple of the burns. The amount of information you receive is amazing, and you are volunteering and working, but they just called us to find out if we wanted to be on the list for the prescribed burns. We didn't, but what we did is contacted them again and said, actually, we're hoping, we would like to see the South County Fire Defense Coalition, the South County possibly consider it being a workshop for all 4 fire safe councils to go to an area and the community there get trained in really, it would affect your burn piles. It would affect how you choose to respect fire. So that's one of the things that we have in the works. And Mount Auckham is having a guest speaker from them tonight. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you. Lester, I appreciate it.